Hey everybody, it's the Ambassador coming at you with a brand new video today, and this will be, as I mentioned before, work video. And we are going to discuss a topic that has been rather prevalent over the last few weeks. Well, actually since 2017, truth be told. But I know I've kind of talked about this. I've talked about Star Wars in my Empire and Return of the Jedi videos. I've talked about it in my video on Emperor Palpatine. But I want to set aside all the original trilogy stuff, all the prequel trilogy stuff. And for those of you who might want my 2 cents on this whole mess, here it is. How do I feel about the Disney Star Wars movies? Well, honestly, it's about, I don't even say 50-50. It's about 70-30, give or take, if you want to do percentages. Because, well, when I say 70-30, 70% of it's bad, 30% of it is good. And I will be completely transparent and honest with you all, everything as we go through this video. When my wife and I found out that they were going to be doing a brand new set of Star Wars movies back in 2014, I was excited. I was legitimately excited. I was like, okay, they're going to continue the story after Return of the Jedi. This should be interesting. Are they going to go with the EU? Are they going to do something different? What are they going to do here? And I think for a lot of people had that similar mindset that I did. We were excited and everything because people have been wondering, is there ever going to be any more Star Wars movies? Was Revenge of the Sith it? I mean, obviously, we learned the news that George Lucas had sold Lucasfilm to Disney and what have you, and we're like, okay, Disney's saying they're going to do more movies. Great. They're going to do one a year. I was a little hesitant about the idea of them doing one movie a year because Lucas, he had 3 years in between all his movies and everything, from starting at the beginning and everything with Star Wars and the original trilogy and the prequels. There were 3 years in between each movie for them to shoot, post-production, whatever. And they came out and what have you. But Disney was like, no, we're going to change the timetable. We're going to bring y'all one a year. And I was like, okay, one Star Wars movie a year? This isn't a terribly bad idea. And then 2015 rolls around and they released The Force Awakens. And I will be, as I said, I will be perfectly candid with you all. When I went to see The Force Awakens, I was entertained. I didn't think it was a completely bad movie, but I was left with a lot of questions. I was like, okay, who's this Rey girl? What's her connection in this world? Where does she come from? Who is she related to, or anything? Why is the Skywalker lightsaber at this alien's bar and what have you? And Han and Leia have separated or whatever. They had a son at one point. The son went off to Uncle Luke's Jedi Academy that Luke had restarted or had started somewhere. We don't know where exactly, but he started a Jedi Academy, and everything went to crap. And now we have this new villain, this new organization, the First Order. We've got Kylo Ren, Ben Solo. We've got General Hux. We've got Supreme Leader Snoke, and we're like, this is interesting. But And then a lot of people start saying, this is almost a copycat of A New Hope. And I went back and rewatched. I remember New Hope, but what I did was I ended up rewatching A New Hope, and then I watched The Force Awakens, and then I came to the realization there's a lot of copied scenes in this movie. Or the scenes have similarities to them. And people start saying J.J. Abrams just copy and pasted A New Hope and everything, just changed things around for this movie. And I was like, yeah, he kind of did. But still, I was intrigued by some of the stuff that he had put into this movie. Like, where did the First Order come from? Are they a same group as the Empire? Are they an offshoot of the Empire, just reformed and everything? Who's this Snoke guy? What happened between Luke and Han and Leia's son? Who is this girl Rey? Where does she come from? Where does she fit in? And then a year later, or anything, we get Rogue One. Now, Rogue One, I will say honestly, I know there were reshoots for the movie and what have you, but honestly, of the Disney movies, of the Disney Star Wars movies, Rogue One for me was the best of the lot, at least thus far. Because this was a war movie set in the Star Wars universe. Because you didn't have any Jedi, you only had Darth Vader, you had Chirrut Inway and Baze Malbus, these Guardians of the Wills, and what have you. But this was a very different take on the Star Wars universe, and it honestly was interesting. I was invested in this story, and you find out that this story links directly to the original trilogy. And you had Cassian Andor. I thought he was an interesting character. The droid K2SO was a beefed up version and a much more intimidating version of C3PO, but almost as funny, if not funnier. You had the girl, for heaven's sakes, Jyn Erso, who was the daughter of this Old Republic / Imperial scientist who had been working on the Death Star project. You had Krennic, played by Mads Mikkelsen. No, Mads Mikkelsen played the father. Excuse me. Anyway. But me and my wife and some friends of ours from college and everything, we went and saw Rogue One in theaters, and everybody was thoroughly entertained. It was a great movie. You had Vader's 2 scenes in there where he's giving Krennic the smackdown, telling him, "This is your place. This is your angle within the Empire, and that's it." And then, of course, you have the ending where Vader is going on a tear down that hallway, killing all those rebel troops, and then you have the Tantive 4 reveal, and you realize this leads directly into episode 4. And I have seen several videos where people have edited together the ending of Rogue One into the beginning of episode 4, and I'm like, this is good. So people have gone back and done this, and they have done a very good job at editing the ending of Rogue One. And I think, honestly, for people to do that, it shows a love and appreciation for what Rogue One was. And I don't know what the reshoots were for Rogue One, but I will say this: Gareth Edwards I think he did a very good job directing this movie, writing it. Well, I know John Knoll, who was a guy and everything who worked at ILM back in the day. I think he's still there. I'm not entirely sure. But for a movie that was filling in a plot hole, it filled in that hole very well, and it filled it in very entertainingly. And then a year after that, in 2017, we get the now obviously infamous Last Jedi. And I use the word infamous because I think for a lot of us, a lot of our Star Wars fans that go back to the original trilogy, who I think a lot of us have come to have a newfound appreciation and have a better understanding of the prequel movies. We see what The Last Jedi was. We see what The Last Jedi is for what it is. And I went opening night. Me and my wife, we went opening night to see The Last Jedi. And it was me and her and a good friend of mine and everything from high school. And there was actually, now this is the one positive memory I have in retrospect or anything from one of the positive memories in retrospect that I have from going to see Last Jedi, because there was a group of cosplayers at the theater and everything, and you had one guy dressed up as Old Man Luke, you had some stormtroopers, some clone troopers, you had one guy done up very, very nice in a very good replica of Boba Fett's armor and everything, and we actually got a picture with them. Everything, they were nice enough and everything to let us get a picture. But it took a while for The Last Jedi to really sink in with me, because at first when we walked out of the theater, our minds were blown at what we had just watched. And for me, the best words I know to use, the anger and resentment, for me didn't quite set in about what I had just watched, because it took a second viewing for me to realize just how deeply flawed The Last Jedi was. And I finally realized what Rian Johnson had done in this movie. And then you find out after the fact that he had been given complete control and creative freedom to do whatever he wanted in this movie, and he wasn't following any of the plot points that J.J. Abrams had laid out in The Force Awakens or any of the outlines or whatever that Abrams had created. And I know this movie has been dissected and discussed, honestly, ad nauseum. But I think the reason why it is because for those of us who grew up with Star Wars and that this franchise has been such an integral part of our lives, our childhoods in particular, and our adult years. And when you see something that you care about, something that you feel is a legacy that's part of your life, that gets broken, you cannot help but feel hurt. And I think for a lot of us Star Wars fans, that's how we feel. We feel like that's something that we love, something that's been a part of our lives, something that has been so integral to how we came to understand the world around us and how much richer the world around us was made by the vision of George Lucas. And to see what Rian Johnson did with this movie, we took it personal. We did. We took it personally. Because one one position that I held for a while at least was, okay, this is like a deconstruction of the prequel movies and a deconstruction of Luke Skywalker and what have you. But then, and if it had been just a pure deconstruction of a character, that I could accept, that I could understand, and that I could accept is the best word I can think of. But then the news comes out about what Kathleen Kennedy was wanting to do, what Rian Johnson, his mindset was, and the fact that they were simply degrading the character of Luke Skywalker, and they also had degraded the character of Han Solo because of some social, political position that they were trying to tear down the patriarchy or trying to tear down toxic masculinity or whatever the case may be. And I wasn't on Twitter at the time when Johnson was making all his snide comments and everything. I learned about this afterwards. And that for me was when The Last Jedi went from being something that had blown my mind to being something that was honestly it was disrespectful, to put it mildly, because Johnson didn't have a respect for this universe. He didn't have a respect for the audience that this movie was geared towards. He didn't have a respect for the lore. He didn't have a respect for the characters. He did not have a respect for what he was bringing to. He was just to be very candid, he was very disrespectful to the entire franchise and the people who have loved it and supported it for 40 some odd years. And if the movie had just been a bad movie, I could let that go. Because there's been bad movies throughout the entire history of cinema. And eventually those movies have been forgotten. But the fact that you have Johnson and Kennedy coming out and saying, oh, you don't understand this movie, or you're just hateful and toxic and narrow-minded and all this other nonsense. They don't understand. They do not understand what Star Wars means to people. For a lot of us who grew up with these movies in our lives, who watched them on TV, on VHS, on DVD, and everything else under the sun, who have such fond memories and such important memories around these movies, these stories are generational. They're passed from one generation to another, and that's why this franchise has lasted 40 years. That's why you had people who were inspired to write books and make comics and create video games surrounding this universe. Because Star Wars was a space where you could come in and be creative and add your own perspective to it. And I know some people may make the argument, well, Rian Johnson was just bringing his own unique perspective to the Star Wars universe. And I could see that argument having weight. But the thing is, Rian Johnson, in my personal opinion, does not have a respect for this universe. He does not have, as I've already said before, he does not have a respect for what was created. He doesn't. And I think that's, for just speaking from my own position and my own perspective, that's the one thing that really bothers me, is that Johnson and Kennedy do not have a respect for what was built before they came in. Now, everybody that's done stuff for the expanded universe, for the EU, they had a respect and a love for this universe, for the Star Wars universe. And that's why they didn't try to reinvent the wheel. They simply tried to make the wheel a little bit bigger. They tried to add their own perspective and inspiration, what they were inspired by from this universe. Because if you look at all the EU content that we have been given over the last, well, since the 1990s, when the EU really did kick off with the Timothy Zahn Thrawn trilogy and just everything else that has come after it, everybody had respect for this world that George Lucas made. And they didn't want to try and break it. They simply wanted to add to it because they had a love and respect for it. And you can tell when someone cares about a thing because they're going to do their very best to make their edition just as good. Rian Johnson didn't. He came in with an agenda that him and Kathleen Kennedy shared. And he did every absolutely cringeworthy, disrespectful, and I will say it here, this is my position, hateful thing that he could to break this world and break the characters that George Lucas created. Now, Lucas drew inspiration from ancient myth and legend and from the cinema of his childhood to create Star Wars. And he did it very well. Is he perfect? No. The argument has been made, and I think this is a valid one, that when it comes to storytelling, Lucas is a very good visual storyteller. When it comes to writing dialogue, that's where you had Lee Brackett and Lawrence Kasdan come in and fill in those gaps where Lucas was weak at, his weak points. But what Rian Johnson did with the Star Wars universe is he utterly broke it. And that's why people now have pretty much divorced the Disney Trilogy from everything that George Lucas made and what everybody else has made in the years after the Star Wars movies ended with Revenge of the Sith and Return of the Jedi. They have divorced, except for Rogue One, every Star Wars movie that has been made since then. They divorced The Force Awakens. They have divorced The Rise of Skywalker, even though that doesn't come out for a couple more days. They do not call this the sequel trilogy anymore. They call it the Disney Trilogy. And that's because these movies that Disney has made, that Lucasfilm has made under Kathleen Kennedy, have so little connection to what George Lucas made that for the only way for people to retain and keep separate from what Disney has made and what George Lucas has made is to codify or canonize the Disney Star Wars movies as the Disney Trilogy. They're not a continuation of the story after Return of the Jedi. And I could go into a long rant here, but I won't, because I have everything in previous videos. But what has happened with Star Wars is a shame. It is. It is a genuine and legitimate shame. Because George Lucas handed Disney and Bob Iger and everybody that works there a golden goose and said, take care of this for me, expand upon it if you want to, but don't screw it up. Well, unfortunately, Kathleen Kennedy and J.J. Abrams and Ryan Johnson have done precisely that. They've screwed it up. And unfortunately, Bob Iger didn't come in time and pull on the reins and rein Kennedy in enough to try and salvage these movies to where people would accept them. Now, I know that there are probably people out there who thoroughly enjoy The Last Jedi and Force Awakens and Solo and everything else, and that, you know what, that's fine. They're entitled to their position, they're entitled to their rights, they're entitled to their perspective. I will never deny anybody that. But for those of us who love this world that George Lucas made for us, these movies that have been made by Lucasfilm under the direction of Kathleen Kennedy, they're not a celebration of Star Wars, they're an insult. They're a slap in the face to everything that George Lucas and so many other people have worked and toiled and striven to make and to share with the world. Disney Star Wars, the Disney Trilogy. To say I don't like it is an understatement. And I know that for those of you who have watched my videos, and I have watched the ones I've done on Return of the Jedi and The Empire Strikes Back, you all know my position. But that being said, I did not become aware of the fandom menace until maybe late 2017, going into 2018. And I didn't discover the channels like Geeks and Gamers and Overlord DVD and World Class BSers and so many others or anything who have been very outspoken about their position and how they feel about what has been done to the Star Wars franchise under the ownership of Disney and the direction of Kathleen Kennedy. But I found people who felt, at least in part, the same way I did about the Disney Trilogy, about the Disney Star Wars movies, and in particular The Last Jedi. Because I grew up in a time, in a world where social agendas and political positions weren't shoved down everyone's throat. You believed what you wanted to believe, you held the positions, whether they be social or political or whatever, or religious, and it was very much live and let live. Believe what you want to believe, don't believe what you want to believe. This is your position, okay, fine. But what has happened in the last several years is we have seen, in particular with Star Wars, this franchise, this universe that we love, become a tool to push some sort of social agenda. And honestly, we don't want this. Nobody said we wanted this. Nobody asked for this. Science fiction, and in particular science fantasy, is a means of escaping from the real world and going into a place where we can dream, where we can imagine, where we can explore a different world than the one we live in. And Star Wars is one of those worlds. It's a means of escape from the humdrum, mundane life that we all live from day to day, where we can see epic stories about heroes and villains, of rebellions and empires. It's a place where we explore the deeper aspects of the human soul. And that's what Star Wars is for me anyway, at least in part. And I think I've pretty much told you all what my other positions are and everything, my other feelings about the Star Wars movies is. Because yes, it is all those things I just listed, but for me, it's also personal. I've pretty much stated my position on that. But do I claim to be affiliated with the Phantom Menace? Yeah, I do. Am I as a outspoken supporter of it? Well, maybe, maybe not. Do I agree with the position of a lot of people who use the hashtag Fandom Menace or who claim to be a part of this loose collection of people who share this love and passion for fandom, in particular the Star Wars fandom? Yeah, I do. You could almost say I was Fandom Menace before the Fandom Menace was even a thing, but that's just my 2 cents on it. Am I as passionate about the Phantom Menace as some other people are? In some ways, yeah. Am I going to go on long rants and whatever about how much I despise and hate what Rian Johnson and Kathleen Kennedy and J.J. Abrams have done? I have. And I've done it in a way that I feel is constructive. I'm not saying that anybody else, what they have said, if they identify as part of the Phantom Menace, that what they've said has not been constructive or insightful. They have. This is just my 2 cents. This is not me throwing shade on anyone or anything. But that brings me to my final point, because I want to wrap this up. For me, Star Wars and everything connected to it has been a part of my life since I was a young man. I've seen every movie except for Solo in theaters. And in a couple of days, I'm gonna have to ask myself a hard and heavy question. Because I don't know if you all want me to do a review of The Rise of Skywalker. I know everybody else is. But I have to ask myself a hard and heavy question. I know I've said previously I have absolutely no intent, I had no intent of going to see The Rise of Skywalker. But I have to ask myself this question. Would my father have? Or would he have been just as turned off by The Last Jedi and everything that has been said online as I have been? And at this particular moment, I don't know. Because it comes down to 2 things. Well, actually, it comes down to 3 things. What will my father have done? How do I feel? And for those of you who are subscribed to my channel, who follow me on Twitter, do you want to hear my 2 cents on this? Because like I said, all the big channels and small channels on YouTube are going to cover this 7 ways from Sunday once it comes out. So the question becomes, do I go see The Rise of Skywalker? And at this particular moment, I don't know. A few years ago, if you had asked me if I was going to go see a Star Wars movie, the answer would have been an instantaneous yes. With no hesitation. But now I just don't know. I'm on the fence. If you all want me to do a review of The Rise of Skywalker, I will do so. Because you are my audience, And I want to bring you my opinion and my position on things. Because obviously, for those of you who are subscribed and for those of you who may have just come across this video, if you want my 2 cents on the movie, I will give it. But in order to do so, I have to go see it. But I have to ask myself that question. Do I go see this movie just so I can review it, bring you all my thoughts on it? Or do I maintain my position that I want nothing to do with it? And I know this may be a very heavy video, and I know it's somewhat longer than some of the other videos I've made. But when you're talking about something like this, sometimes you have to take a little more time. So I'm not going to belabor the point. If you all want me to go see it, comment down below or contact me on Twitter at my handle Rogue5770 Rogue5778 and let me know. If you want me to see Rise of Skywalker so I can review it and bring you all my thoughts, I will do so. If you say, no, Ambassador, don't worry about it, plenty of other people are going to do it, then okay. I'll stay home. I'll watch the other Star Wars movies instead. Or I'll watch something else and bring you all a review that night. But all that being said, for those of you who are new to my channel, welcome. I'm glad you found me. This video is a little bit longer than some of my other ones I've done. I do cover pop culture of the 1980s and 90s. I'm currently doing a series on the TV show Babylon 5, which is a 1990s TV show, and so on. And I do talk about Star Wars, but it is not the main content of my channel. So if you liked what you watched, if you liked what you heard, consider giving it a like and sharing it. As I mentioned already, you can reach me on Twitter at Rogue5778. And until next time, my friends, this is the Ambassador, signing off.